Hi, David White, consultant.
I'm Oliver Pilgerstorpher, the CMO at IFS.
Jeremy Bevan at Cisco.
I'm Louise Fisk. I am the Communications and Marketing Director at BAE Applied Intelligence.
I'm Tim Lamble, Director of B2B Data and Performance at Gyro.
Hello, I'm Christoph Woermann. I'm the Global Marketing Head of Deutsche Bank's Corporate Bank.
Okay, so morning everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. Today we're going to have a conversation about inbound marketing, carrying on the conversation that we started earlier on in the week. So I'm going to kick off with hopefully a relatively simple question. For the benefit of the audience, what are the key ingredients of a sound inbound strategy? Maybe we can go to you first, Christoph.
I think for a sound inbound strategy, you have to have, first of all, a very, very good idea which topics resonate with your audience and currently are developing. And then you need to make sure that you develop the content. We develop content with people in-house, but if you don't do this, develop it with somebody who can really understand the topics, avoid izations, avoid fluff, make sure that you have the right ingredients to cook a good dinner. And if you don't have the right ingredients, be bold and say, don't focus on something just to howl with the wolves. That's a good starting point for good inbound marketing.
Louise?
Yes, I would agree with all of those actually. I think for us it's know your customer, really know who you're aiming at and what they want to hear. And the other part which you said similarly, it's around providing content that sense makes for them. So I think there's a myriad of information out there at the moment, and our job is to really give them something that helps them make a decision rather than just adds to the pile.
I think that's crucial. Step one for me is trying to understand actually what you want to try and achieve. Like what business prerogative are you trying to do? Are you trying to build more awareness as part of your initial activities, or are you trying to move people from one step to another through the funnel? And I think at that point, when you try and understand actually what you're trying to move people in doing and what actions they should take, it then starts becoming a lot clearer about what type of materials and what type of activation campaign you could put together to then enact that in real life.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of obvious, isn't it, that you have to start with the customer, but it's so easy not to. And I think if I had to sum up the kind of real critical ingredient, it's kind of along the lines of what you were saying, but I think the opportunity is to do it as a business, to do it with sales, with the engineering teams, to do it together, to really understand who are the customers that we really care about, that we're actually trying to do something with, whether it's acquire new ones or develop existing ones, and then to really think about what is the kind of content and material that's actually going to resonate with them at their various stages of the journey. Because until you really have taken the time to understand that, probably to dissect it into some kind of persona-based approach, how are you going to architect any kind of inbound strategy that is really going to appeal? So you have to net it out as, yes, start with the customer, but I would say do it as a business, rather than do it in isolation just as marketing.
What I would like to add is also, I think you have to be in the mental framework to figure that good inbound marketing is like the invitation to an inspiring dinner evening. So you don't invite to a dinner evening where nobody has to bring anything to the party, where finally your guest will say, well, I'll never join that party again. So we heard this week, I was in a conversation where somebody said, don't interrupt someone's life if you don't have a good reason. And that's exactly it. If you have something that contributes to a dialogue that makes somebody more intelligent and more knowledgeable, then inbound marketing has a very good starting point. So the engineering, the topics, the strategies, the channels, and that's basically how you lay out the dinner party. But first of all, you have to have inspiring guests.
Actually, and I suppose if I play on the dinner analogy,
it's a good analogy.
Then actually it's people are finding out about there's going to be a really good dinner and they want to come as well.
That's right.
Right? And so how do they have the opportunity to step in? Right? They don't necessarily get invited.
I think it's interesting. It's important, I think, to your point, to make sure that you're in a white space and that the kind of stuff you want to talk about with your customers is something that differentiates yourselves from your competitors. But I also think one of the troubles that we have with that is making sure that's actually true to what you can deliver as a business. So one of the major things is you can promise a white space and a kind of hallowed ground that you own, but if you can't deliver on that with the products and services when they get to you, that's where you come into real difficulty. So I think there's consistency of outbound and inbound and connecting the two, but also then when they get there, they have something really meaningful to get their teeth into.
Well, you build trust every single time, or you lose trust when you do successful inbound marketing. So inbound marketing, although it may be done sort of on a mass scale, it's still a personal exercise, and never forget that.
And to your point, it's around the collaboration as well, isn't it? So internally, it actually helps if we're all aiming for the same goals. So the sales team, the product team, marketing, comms, we all know this is our end goal, this is how we're going to achieve it together. And then the content that we get put out, that's just part of the story.
I do like the point you're making about outbound as well, because one of the opportunities I think is to really truly mix together what is your combined inbound, outbound strategy. How do those two things actually work together? I mean, the days of cold outbound are well and truly over, right? But inbound is a perfect way of bringing almost like a real-time element to when is the right moment to reach out.
Yeah, the brand to demand,
yes,
hallowed kind of holy grail, I suppose, of delivering that. And I think you're absolutely right. The way that a lot of the brands that we work with go to market with their brand activation and the way that they then do demand is often quite different, and being able to connect those two, but also not have inbound led fully by sales or outbound led fully by brand, and having a collaboration between those is what we see as delivering true success.
Yeah.
I'd like to pick on what Louise just said. It's a super important point we have to land here, that the alignment with sales and marketing is such that sales doesn't see marketing just as somebody delivering what kind of a hot lead or anything that's just straight away tangible for sales. They need to understand that marketing is helping them on every step of the journey, and even if it's a very long term journey. In particular, inbound marketing is not immediacy marketing. And that's why sales need to understand that it's the careful dance between the personal sale that sales does and the environment, the framework that marketing delivers to give credibility, to give authenticity, and therefore enable a better sale.
I always think of it as, I always think of it as it's the opportunity for sales and marketing to work together in the way that when sales is in front of the customer, great, but also when sales is not in front of the customer, which might be 5 seconds later, right? They've just left, and the next thing that happens is there's a Google search that's starting to check you out, right? But also check what other customers are saying. So this notion that we're actually working together to make sure that there's a consistency of story, of message, and authenticity about what's being said by the sales guy, is backed up by what they see. And
also I think certainly in the advent of kind of digital and people really getting on their game in terms of what content's out there, most customers that come to you, by the time they speak to a salesperson or ever see a salesperson, probably know more about your product than they ever have done. And so that journey to inbound marketing, where they might finally pick up the phone and talk to you, if you haven't already hit all the points that you need to hit from a brand perspective and from your overall product architecture and how you're talking to them, they may have already been disengaged. Even if you finally get to talk to them on the phone, that opportunity may have
I think that's why it's so important to have sales and marketing joined up right at the beginning of that journey. So we're all agreeing, okay, this is the customer, these are their points of interest, this is the problem that they have that they were trying to solve for them. And then we as marketeers, we can put in the right content, we can get them engaged, but then we can't just drop the mic, hand it over, it's over to you now, sales. We have to then say, okay, so we've done this content as per our earlier discussions, so here you go, this is how it links in, these are the threads that you can use to take them back to the discussion about this was your problem, here's the solution, and just help them along the journey as well.
And I think the reason why it's even more important to have that agreement is if you do a very nurturing inbound marketing activity, you're characterizing a certain brand personality of somebody who's willing to share information and give. If you don't have a proper sales alignment, and suddenly you have the customer be in touch with sales, and sales is hardcore, get rid of it, close the deal, then you've got suddenly a divergence between what you nurtured as a personality and what you are. And that's why it's important for us marketeers to always say, look, the sales' job, I have something that I need to get rid of, and marketing is to create a demand for it in the first place. So therefore, if the lead is done very well, sales doesn't have to sell in the classical way. It's just, as you just said, that if the consumer is super informed, just reinforce that and ask where else they need help on the step of their decision, and then it sorts itself out.
Oliver?
A lot of the points have been covered actually, so I don't want to retrace for retracing's sake, but just to emphasise the importance of not just integrating with sales, but actually working on the initial part of defining what is a good customer look like, and make sure that you're all in agreement, because otherwise, you're right, whether it's the messages or the format or the delivery or the integration, if fundamentally you start off from the wrong place, then you're never going to have an integrated approach, and I think that really is fundamental.
Well, I guess one of the points you made earlier on in the week was the purpose of inbound is to take an unidentified customer and turn them into an identified customer, and we're talking a lot about the integration of activities. So you probably can't consider inbound as an isolated channel of activity any longer. It's got to be part of an integrated activity that draws customers through the top of the pipe to the bottom of the pipe. So you have to involve the sales team from the very outset to make sure that they're bought into the strategy that you've adopted, and therefore they're ready and prepared and enabled to take up responsibility for qualifying that lead further once you hand it over. So what tips do you have for CMOs in other organizations that are struggling with that integration with sales to drive that type of sales enablement activity?
The only thing I would pick up on what you said just in phrasing the question is, I wouldn't say that the person who you're bringing in through inbound is unknown. You might not know the name or the specific company, but if you don't know the profile, the type of person that you're after in the first place, then as we were saying before, you fall at the first hurdle.
What I would straight away say, David, of course it's a lovely thing to have that you've got an unknown becoming a known and then going through the funnel. I think very often we are tempted to make that mistake that once somebody is known, we think, okay, fine, that's part of the safe set and can sort of be nurtured some way, but our focus is still on the unknown. I think nowadays, and I work in an industry in financial services in B2B where our sales cycles are super long, it's much more important to work with our known customers and to make sure that you nurture your known customers. You treat them as all the time as like a new customer. And if somebody else then comes into the franchise that also fits then the criteria, that's fantastic added value. But my top tip for a CMO would be work with your existing customers, get deeper relations, because then you get advocacy as a result of it naturally. No programs needed.
I think you mentioned sales enablement as part of your question as well, and I think that's one of the critical ingredients, because now we're talking about inbound as one of the ways that your customer is going to interact with you. But the truth is, it's all the channels and how they're going to work together. And I think we've all worked in organizations where what the sales guys might be using as their content and story may be a little bit different to what we're using in marketing, and maybe a bit different to even what some of the sales specialists might be using, or so there is an opportunity here to do one of the things which I always think is one of the fundamentals we should all be doing anyway, which is, what is fundamentally our messaging and our story that we're trying to take to market, and how does that relate to the solutions that customers actually end up buying? Because quite often that is a disconnected set of things. And so there is a whole kind of discipline here that needs to come in. And it's across the business, and it's to do what is quite hard work often, is to really do that messaging alignment, story alignment, all the way from the top, to the last mile, so that you can actually engineer the customer journey in a meaningful way across all of those touch points.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, because I think it sort of extends the role that marketing and communications actually plays. So we've seen probably for the first time in the last year or so that marketing now has slots on the sales training academies, for example, and we will run sessions. Sometimes they'll be about the content that we're running and giving salespeople those threads so that they know the story that's being told. But other times it might be speaker training or all the different types of skills, but we'll be doing it together as a team. And exactly to your point, you have to have one look and feel to the customer. And that's part of the reason we're starting to do that type of thing. So when you deal with company X, this is how company X behaves.
Exactly.
I think that's massively important for us. And as an agency, obviously, we're highly adept at generating volumes of leads and all those kind of things, either through outbound or working on inbound. But where the companies fail or succeed is in that connection between a lead generated or whatever and how that salesperson integrates. So we talked about it in the last question, but the sales team and the marketing team being super integrated, the messaging needs to be super integrated so that when they have downloaded a white paper or whatever it might be, or whatever action they've taken to get to the sales team, the conversation is continuous and matches their customer expectation. What we often see issues arise with clients is where it is a cold stop here and a very different approach. So it resonated really well with us. One of our clients, global messaging is all around being a partner. Yeah. And if you then have a sales team that are very mercenary in their approach to that, immediately they've spent all this brand work being a partner, and your sales team is destroying all of that immediately. So they've actually worked very hard on making sure that the partnership kind of idea from their brand work flows all the way into what their sales team are doing as well. So the people feel that, live that, and therefore are much more able to convert.
It goes so much further though than just the integration with the sales team. I mean, you've actually got to, like as you're saying, the message has got to be based on what you're selling, and then you've got to deliver it, because otherwise, you've got a problem with, as we all know, the best salespeople in our world, who are our current customers, hopefully selling to others as advocates. Right. And if you miss that messaging from the top, or you don't deliver on what the promise is, whether it be from sales or from marketing, the way that message is being delivered, then bad NPS scores, no advocacy, and it's a massive problem.
There'll be plenty of customers who will be able to point out what's not true about what's being said at any point.
Exactly, right? And then my concern is that you put a sales team together and a marketing team. You come up with that message, and you think, okay, we're on the money. You're going to be far from it if you're not involving support, if you're not involving product team, if you're not involving the delivery team. And I think that's just it's hard to coordinate everything. But if you genuinely want to have that thread. It's mandatory.
Interestingly, sorry, a quick point. Just one thing that we've noticed a big trend on, obviously, as an agency, we do a lot of brand work and brand campaigns and brand propositions and stuff. It used to be, here's our external brand and here's our internal brand, and they were quite different. Now, a lot of the work we're doing is how do you actually have that consistent brand across everyone, so that the person in the sales team feels the same as your customer, feels the same as the person in support, feels the person in marketing, so that communication is holistic in its approach. And you're absolutely right, if you can't deliver that.
I was going to say, it's a short thing. We actually went through an interesting exercise ourselves. We actually implemented our own software. It took 6 months, and it took a lot of heartache for all of the people involved. But actually going through that process and walking the mile in your customer's shoes, it changes everybody's behaviour. And it was a real culture shift for us as an organisation, not just for the people who are implementing, not just for the way that the sales guys talked about, but even the way that some of the people on my team now behave when they're designing things and they're looking at the different messaging. It was a lucky opportunity for us, or a serendipitous opportunity for us. But I think if you can instill that journey or that experience for your people to actually go through the customer journey, it just has people have a real epiphany.
I'd like to round up what Tim said about the external and the internal brand. That's why when we're talking about inbound marketing, I think we should even have in mind the sort of inbound marketing exercise. What do I mean by that? Inbound marketing is for customers and non-customers to take them with content on a journey to end up on a target web page. Think about the fact that you should do this in your company as well. Don't treat it separately and saying, we've got an information portal that's different. I treat my internal customers as my external customers to lead them to the same way. That's why I say inbound marketing. You need to make sure that you equip your advocates with the same information, and not by telling them you have to read, by treating them like customers. Say, well, you happen to be part of this company, but I treat you like a customer as well, so that you then take the journey as a natural advocate faster.
It's a really good point. My experience is that when you're looking at integrated campaigns, not just on a local basis, but when you're talking about the globalization, your audience is much more than just the end customer. It's got to start with the customer, but then you've got to think about the integration of sales, the integration of product, the way you treat that internal audience as a customer. They have to become part of your messaging platform and your audience and your deliverables, because otherwise you're not going to get a market-driven proposition that's been designed around a specific customer need and is then communicated effectively and consistently by a sales team that understands what to say when they talk to a customer. You cannot balance all those levers if you don't start off with considering your internal audience to be as important as your external audience. So again, coming back to the point of where would you recommend you start in terms of building those strong stakeholder relationships to make sure that you have alignment throughout all the stakeholder functions tightly aligned to the business goals?
You have to start internally with your stakeholders. And maybe this is not directly on topic, but for me it's important when we are talking about marketing strategy. Strategy is a word that is super overused because it gets changed every year. Then it's not a strategy, then it's tactics. And to be bold enough to agree with your internal stakeholders, these are the topics, these are the themes that we want to be known, and have the breadth to carry this over even a year and longer if needed. I actually want our customers to basically tell us, did you know that you've got the expertise here and there? And if they start talking, then I say, okay, we have achieved that positioning target, that inbound marketing goal that was agreed. Because what you usually find in the financial service industry and others is that there are new topics coming to the fore, and then people say, oh, we have to do something on blockchain. And as a marketeer, you have to say, well, if we have something, fine. If not, stay away from it. ESG is the next topic. Suddenly everybody goes environmental. We had already a wave, and hopefully it's ingrained in many companies. Then you can just continue the conversation that has been augmented by events this year. But if you start jumping on a topic, just because sales tells you, it can be catastrophic. So stakeholder management is super important and focus.
I was going to say, you make some big bets in those as well. So for example, we have a lot of our key marketing messages in our induction material. From day one when people come through the door, they know what those messages are, they know what the key campaigns are, so that when someone asks them, if you're in delivery, you still know what the key campaigns are, so that everybody is on the same page straight away.
That's good.
I was going to be a bit contrary to your viewpoint there, Christoph. Yes, I think I don't disagree at all that you need to be true to your brand or what you actually sell or what you do. I think there is a balance to be had, though, when there are new topics coming into the financial services industry or what have you, that it's important to give your customers or your stakeholders reassurance that you do have an understanding of some of those hot topics. So you mentioned blockchain. If Deutsche Bank doesn't have an opinion on blockchain, your customers start wondering, are you not keeping up with the pace of the industry? Do you not have a viewpoint? So I think from an inbound activity, depending where you're trying to instigate action as part of the funnel, I think it's worth considering where you need to have an opinion, even if you don't deliver, and your messaging needs to stand true to that. I think it's somewhat remiss sometimes to leave the, I think this.
But Oliver, you make it, and it's good that you actually emphasize that point, because it's important to challenge that view all the time. There's a complete difference between I have a view and basically say, this is my position, as opposed to the allure to say, and I want to be a thought leader on it. And that's why you see in various industries a lot of so-called white papers where the word "ization" is used because it sounds grand, but it's fluff. So stay away from that. You can have an article that says the position of Deutsche Bank on this topic is this. That's absolutely fine. But if you write a white paper, you better have more than just an opinion.
I actually think this is where marketing is getting bolder and where you look at the complete ecosystem. So if I look at my clients, there's absolutely no way that I can provide them with everything that they need. I can't give them every single data point. So, we've taken a bold step, and I see other companies doing it as well, to say, well, who else is out there in the ecosystem that can? Because surely my job is to give a balanced view to the customer so that then they can make their own minds up about what they're buying. So we now, we have networks with a lot of different partners, but also some competitors as well, where we'll bring in their thoughts and we use them as subject matter experts, and we'll provide that information to the customers.
So something else that struck me as part of this conversation as well, and it goes back to, on the one hand, the kind of being able to tell a good story, have that as a consistent story and all the rest of it. One of the ingredients in here, of course, is not all individual salespeople are created equal. Mm-hmm. You have great ones and you have ones that are not so great. And I think what we've all been guilty of is probably spraying way too much content out there for our own salespeople to use, and then we rely on them to pick out the best content that they think will work best for their customers. And one of the opportunities around having something that's very integrated and well thought through, but also very insight driven, right? Because you're going to get a lot of insights through inbound marketing around what are people really looking for, what are they really consuming, what are they really downloading, what are they really reading, and use that as the kind of critical content that you want to make sure your sellers are using, so that the best seller and the average seller are actually both able to go out there and use the best content in front of their customers, which is in support of your total communication strategy. And it's, if I think about some of the things that we've done, we've almost done the kind of Amazon-esque rating of content, but it's not our own rating. It's what customers are saying is the best stuff.
Yeah.
And this is the stuff that would be most valuable to you. And make that very easy for salespeople to consume.
Yeah.
So, within the context of their opportunity, here's the best information that's available to you based on what customers are really interested in
and
relative
I think
to
that backs up your earlier point as well, because like everyone, I get people coming to me saying, I've got to write a blog on this topic, and you have to take a step back and look at the data and think, well, when we wrote a blog on that, we maybe got 10 people and they weren't who we're after. However, when we wrote a blog on that, we got 100,000 and the vast majority were who we're after. And then you have to manage the people internally accordingly and sort of let them see the data so they can see for themselves. We're not just being awkward. There is actually a reason behind this.
I also think on a more mercenary level, I suppose what we see with some clients is the tendency to create content after content after content, which obviously costs money as well. And I think the B2C rule has always been 60-40 brand, and actually we tend to see in a lot of B2B clients more like 80-20 towards demand, unfortunately, in that space, and with a lot of it with content creation being behind that spend. And I think the simplicity of your message and the content you create not only benefits your internal salespeople, as you said, but actually just means that you can focus more outbound and inbound spend on a single message that you own and you can be authentic about and powerful in, and allows you to focus that towards more of ideally a 50-50 split between brand and demand there. And I think not just confusing your own people, but actually just how you get that message out there is a much...
So we talked a lot about the alignment with stakeholders inside of your organisation, as well as making sure that you're tightly aligned to business goals and thinking about everything from a customer perspective. We've spoken about the importance of really good quality content. Let's talk a bit about the most effective channels that drive the greatest levels of inbound success for you. And I also want to bring in at this point the impact of technology. So where do you think technology is going to drive change from an inbound perspective over the next year, 2 years, 5 years or longer?
Well, maybe to start with the obvious one, for most of the B2B marketeers, LinkedIn is a fantastic channel to drive in inbound marketing. But to straight away latch on that technology topic, when you think about how the algorithm works at LinkedIn, that the more you comment and provide just sort of, even if it's nonsense comment, the more quantity comment you provide, the higher you rank. I think it's a relatively dangerous development because it motivates and incentivizes people active on LinkedIn for the very wrong reason. And we need to be careful that LinkedIn doesn't get relegated to sort of, show funny videos and make funny comments channel, because then the importance for a viable information channel, clutter-free information channel, will go down. We've seen this with Twitter. Of course, we've got very active people using Twitter, and that's why Twitter's in everybody's mind. But I have seen clearly over the journey that we in Deutsche Bank in our business line have done with Twitter, that we have already seen a peak, and it's going to a plateau where I don't know whether we're heading down or not, because at conferences, super relevant to share straight away there and then content. But imagine the avalanche of news that are created all the time. If that channel is overcrowded, people tend to move away from it.
And I think when you talk about channels and you think about something like LinkedIn, we use LinkedIn a lot and it's good for engagement. But like you said, there is so much information and we're relying on the end user to sift through it all and think what's relevant, what's not. So from a channel perspective, we still find the face-to-face events are the really big drivers for us. Now you have to obviously build everything up before those and you have to continue the journey after those, but those are the face-to-face. There doesn't really at the moment seem to be anything that has overtaken that.
Yeah.
That's interesting, yeah.
For someone who, I live and breathe data performance, social PPC, programmatic stuff, actually it is events that for our clients are still one of the most important things we do. And whether that is what they do on the ground and then how we connect that to our digital channels in terms of the conversations, whether it is through Twitter and topic targeting, or whether it's through LinkedIn and making sure that we're taking the content post-event, or even just geo-targeting the event with outbound marketing, or doing some proximity out of home and connecting that, we find that the way people lean into the conversation in events, the fact that they're focused on that particular topic at that particular time, to your point about having to screen out LinkedIn stuff, I think is a really valuable thing. And wherever we can link that with retargeting and taking customer details from events, matching that first party data, then pushing it through LinkedIn advertising, that provides the best results for us. So actually, despite the fact that my job is 90% social media and stuff, we actually are more and more looking at events as the key driver of that kind of intent and information.
Yeah, there's no doubt events are, I agree with you. I mean, as a kind of a surge of activity, I think good planning around an event is almost like nothing better. We definitely see, social channels as crucial search. These are the two kind of big ones, and I think often combined with event activity as well. And it's almost like that, I wonder whether in the end, people are choosing to participate, whether it's on LinkedIn or in certain communities and the rest of it. We've built up a pretty substantial customer advocacy community, people who've lent in and want to be involved and learn from each other, as well as participate with things for Cisco. And actually, ironically, events are quite often the big recruitment fairs, if you like, for where people love what they're seeing at the event and then want to get involved more. And I wonder whether, in terms of where this is going, I think maybe fewer better events that are better integrated and more powerful and create more of a surge. But then the customers who are acting out in the communities that are really of interest to them and give them value it's actually about how we meet them where they are. Right, and then how they then come to us because they've had good experiences in their communities and in their conversations.
And I guess as well, where does an event play in on the customer journey? Because a good inbound strategy is going to consider what stage is the customer at in their dialogue and engagement with you, and therefore what content are you serving to them, and where does an event become the best way to deliver that content or that experience that makes them leave with an empathetic relationship having been developed with you.
And you make a super salient point, David, because an event, of course, you have the main pillars of the direct marketing and the digital marketing, and the event has the added value that you really have got more face time, longer face time, because usually when you do digital, breakup rates are around 2 minutes. We're writing shorter stuff, and sometimes white papers are used to be a thought leadership document that people just keep but don't necessarily read from cover to cover. At an event, we've got your 1 hour, your 2 hour airtime, where you can carefully play the edutainment game. You educate somebody on something, but you still entertain and you create a personal rapport. And that's why you're absolutely right. And I would say also resist the temptation not to do too many events. It's like inviting you every weekend to a dinner party. Then the value of the dinner party goes down. So dose it. Therefore, you need to know where you are. And the digital gives us a fantastic tool for the pre-event marketing, the post-event marketing. Never ever before did we have so much rich data.
But I would add in the during event as well, because if you look at, some of our biggest shows, right, Cisco Live in EMEA, we attract around 15,000, 16,000 people come to that. We have about 80,000 people online with us at the same time, right? So because not everyone can travel to the event, but the kind of catalyzing experience of the event and the opportunity that is where, news is going to be broken, some specialist engineers will be on hand. And even in the event itself, if you've shown up, you're participating in virtual communities as well, and finding each other and making connections while you're there. And this is like the perfect blend, I think, of digital and physical coming together is the event experience, fully blown out to where it can be.
And that's where technology comes into play a little bit as well. So if I think about some of our events, so we have slightly smaller customer base, so there'd be anything from maybe 35 people if in a really targeted event up to a couple of hundred. And then you can use things like apps and real-time voting, and you can put the technology questions to people and other people can answer them. And as you say, you start then getting the community going. It's
And things like if you have a demonstration hall, you can have sensors around the hall so that you can track where people go and deliver content to them via their smartphones or apps at the time at which they leave that stand. So I think technology's got an enormous role to play in future. There's one point I wanted to jump onto before we wrap is a lot of organizations are finding themselves in very overcrowded market spaces at the moment. So having an inbound strategy that differentiates you in amongst your competitors must be a really important topic. What advice do you guys have for the audience in that respect?
Yeah, I don't know that I'd always say that you need to think about a differentiated strategy. I think you've got to do what the right thing is for your customer. And I think that often the differentiation will come on the delivery and the way that, the content and the way that you then present it. I'm interested actually that all of you guys have gravitated towards events in that previous question, because yes, it plays an important part of the mix, but I just look at my behaviour as a CMO, and I just don't go to that many events. I mean, I just don't have the time to do it. And so, I think about all of those different elements of inbound and just behaviour patterns of target audiences. And I think it's changing. And I think that one of the biggest things that we can do as leaders is to make sure that the jobs that we had in our teams previously are getting updated in terms of the mandate of what we need to deliver in terms of even as broad as the marketing mix, but then specifically the way that we then go and do our inbound activities, and make sure that maps to the personas and the people that we're trying to target. And so whilst I wouldn't look at my competitor and think, okay, they're doing these, this mix of things and that's right or that's wrong. What I try and look at is what actually makes sense for the customer, and how do I make sure that the prospect, and how do I make sure that the messages I want to land with them, hitting them at the right time in the format that actually will instigate the next step on the journey.
And in a way that's going to be memorable to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would agree with that. So Gartner talk a lot around the different types of salesperson, and I think it works for the marketing element as well. So there's a giver, which is just here, have all the information. There's taker, which is tell me what you want to know. And then, as you said, there's sense. Yeah. So help me make sense of all the information that I have. And I think you're right. It's our role to do that and do that well for them.
I mean, from a very, very sort of practical perspective in terms of that kind of white space stuff we talked about right at the beginning, and now a lot of the time we try and identify, you've got a topic that you are authoritative on your own, but actually it's how is the customer talking about that. So often we see white papers generated with internal terminology, and that then never gets found via SEO, let alone PPC, paid for stuff, because no one's searching for that particular term. Being able to identify customer needs and keywords and the things they're talking about and the way they're talking about it, not only buying that through media, but also adapting your content to resonate with that audience. Just as simple as changing a couple of phrases or approaches to the way you think is one of the things that delivers the best results for the way we work, because otherwise you are stuck in that kind of very inward looking, this is how we talk about this thing, how we call it, and if you never externalize that to what the customer needs, then you're lost in that space.
I'd also say sometimes I don't want a differentiated strategy from my competitor. Because if I can see that they're putting out a load of bump you were talking about on LinkedIn before that I wholly disagree with, or that I want to have an opinion on, they're targeting a certain person of that, and if I've got a contrary view, or I want to put a message out that really resonates with them, then actually really understanding what your competitor's strategy is probably more important to me. So I think the bit that I would want to be differentiated on most is the understanding of where people are and the analytics behind where it all sits along that journey, so that I could then move them through that prospect journey in the way that I felt was right.
The only other thing I say on differentiation though, so if for example you have 4 companies in the same space, if you look at the way they describe themselves on their website, for example, take away the names, can you actually work out which companies? That I would say the messaging is really important. Yeah. That's where you should be differentiating as well.
You also get onto a topic quickly though. When you're in spaces where you've got multiple organizations targeting the same customer with a similar message. How does personalization play into that to drive that authentic customer experience that leaves them with a memorable image of you as an organization and drives them to you and not to your competitors?
Well, Louise hit the nail on the head. You don't have the same message as your competitors. Otherwise, you just, it's everyone's vanilla, and it's not differentiated.
The way I would say it is, don't be afraid of me too, because you are differentiating about the how. I mean, in the financial service sector, most of the banks can deliver what the others can do, with some regional differences. But it's then again, I mean, who decides? Which bank to choose? It's the customer itself, and they do this on various aspects. One aspect is the cognitive perception of factual capabilities, but the other is also the attitude of how somebody is in the market, the whole mix, the people they speak to. So whilst I would say you can, first of all, like Oliver said, you have to take place in various channels. So you have to be where customers want you, whether they want to hear a podcast or watch a video or read an article, absolutely fine. So be present there, but then surprise them sometimes with intelligent formats. So we surprised maybe beginning of this year with the launch of a trade finance TV that is not a Deutsche Bank TV, that's an industry channel. So we invite the industry to contribute. And why are we doing this? Because the customer should get the benefit of industry knowledge that's shared. And the customer will finally decide where they want to go. And even if they don't finally end up in my organization, at least I've contributed and left a positive mark. And that's my brand identity. So that would be my top tip for marketeers.
I think you made a great point about where they end up. I think that's the danger with personalization, is it can be that over-personalization is something that we're always mindful of because of the customer journey we've been talking about, and the fact that nobody ever goes from this bit to this bit to this bit and then to sales and buys something. They go all over the place. If you are over-personalized and try and squeeze them into this one bit based on the data you understand, they may never know another part about your business or something else that pops into their head, or find another piece of content that you're talking about. So you've got to be really careful about that line between personalization to automation, where they get 4 messages that are very specific to that one thing you might have read 3 months ago, and you never know about the 10 other things you could help them solve as a company. That's the line which you need to definitely.
But it's also
carefully.
quite difficult to cover every base, isn't it? Because on
Yes,
the one hand
so
you're saying,
there's
let's
a
go
middle road,
personalised, but then
definitely.
we say, but let's not miss another opportunity at the same time.
Absolutely.
That just drives waves of content and waves of expenditure and
Yes.
input that are
There's a
almost
healthy middle
wasted.
ground.
Yeah, so it's how do you strike that fine balance between building a relationship with a customer that does differentiate you from your competition? And I know we talked about messaging being important, but to say drive different messaging and to deliver different messaging in a way that resonates with your customer is not an easy thing to do. You've got to be able to have the insight that enables you to develop a message that's going to be relevant and resonate with them. And that, I think part of that is to do with how you engage with the customers, with the sales team and the product teams in crafting that message. But then crossing this barrier, or making sure you don't cross the barrier between what's acceptable personalization and what's invasive, is a real challenging thing to do, because we're probably going to see, or at least the research online suggests we're going to see much more of that in future as you see convergence between B2B and B2C. But B2B personalization doesn't necessarily, I think, mean the same as B2C personalization. It's not necessarily about your personal characteristics, but it is about you as an organization, you as the way you consider the other players in the marketplace. So
it's where it comes back to your brand and your purpose and making the emotional connection, isn't it? Because I think, human beings make a decision emotionally and then use the rational to back up the decision they've already made. Yeah. So, that's where you can differentiate yourself as well on what do we stand for? Do we stand for something that the customer thinks, I connect with that?
It's interesting, really, because I think, it's true. Personalization has also almost got overused as the thing we all must do. And yet at the end of the day, all we're really trying to do is make it as easy as possible for the customer to get what they want at the point where they want it. And personalization may well be part of that answer, but in many ways, if you rewind all the way back from what are we really trying to do here, we're trying to be responsive You know, we're trying to give them the information they want in the simplest possible way. We don't want them to overthink and waste time, you know, on things they don't really want to see. So I think it's in the way the world has moved. You know, people are not prepared to spend time on things that appear to be, you know, not useful to them. So, you know, how do you make everything that the customer sees as useful and as relevant as possible? And it might cover a multitude of bases, but, you know, it's which is why this whole multi-touch point thing, you know, omni-channel strategy is so important. And also I think that the way we show up, you know, truly represents who you are as a company. You know, people buy from companies that have values that they share, right? And that's becoming even more true. And so I think just, you know, I think it's a careful crafting of, you know, how is all of this really going to work together? And how is that going to show up as the customer experience? And is every customer experience going to be truly representative of you as a company? That's what you're trying to solve, which sounds very grand and big. And yes, personalization is a part of it, but I think over-fixating on personalization for personalization's sake, sometimes I think you can lose that point, you know, so. You
know, Gartner put out a piece of research this week that I just came across, and they said 80% of marketeers will have stopped doing any personalisation by 2025.
There you go.
I think they make this claim simply for me to bring it up at this type of conversation, because I mean, I just can't believe it either. And I think you're right. I mean, the definition of personalisation and the hype around it has meant it's become a little bit of a...
It's like we're all focusing on getting to being personalised rather than really driving...
And personalisation doesn't mean, you know, writing the name on top of, you know, an ABM delivery or what have you. It's about instigating the right thing at the right time in a compelling way.
Sadly, I think we have to stop there, but we can carry on in another room just to the side if there's any more points to add.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for a really good discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.